All right, hello wine drinking people. It's still Tuesday, May 4th. We're back for the second part of the show, the second seminar for the Great Wine Seminar. This weekend, Pierre Lurton was back, a double dose of Pierre. First off, to start out the seminar, we were fresh and tanned and ready to get going at the Eden Rock Hotel on Saturday morning at a bright-eyed and bushy-tailed at about 9 o'clock. Our eager tasters started filing into the room. And Cheval Blanc is undoubtedly one of Bordeaux's greatest and most unique wines. For the most part of this century, it sat alone atop of the Saint-Emilion hierarchy. It wasn't until the 1970s that Ozone began to challenge the wines of Cheval Blanc. And today, well, Saint-Emilion is one of the only appellations where you have the possibility of being elevated to the next level of quality, Premier Grand Cru Class A. There's a lot of Grand Cru Class A wines. Angelus, for instance, was elevated, and what they do is they look at a 10-year flight of your wines and decide whether your wines have improved enough to take it up to the next level. This property, Cheval Blanc, sits on the border between Pomerol and Saint-Emilion, and in many ways this wine is as much like a Pomerol as it is a Saint-Emilion. The property's neighbors are L'Evangile and La Consciente, two of the greatest properties in Pomerol, and it's been categorized because of its content by some people as, like I said before, being more Pomerol-like than like Saint-Emilion. There's no other chateau in Bordeaux that uses as much Cabernet Franc as Cheval Blanc does. In some years, it's actually more than the Merlot. Okay, well, Pierre Lurton took over Cheval Blanc after it fell prey to the LMVH group, the largest luxury groups in the world that make handbags, perfumes, champagne. This is headed by Bernard Arnault and Belgium's richest businessman, Albert Frère. And one of the things that people were worried about when this group took over is that as big business moved in, the quality of this wine would go down. And that has not happened. Anything but that has happened. The quality has gone nowhere but up. Well, one of the great things about this seminar is the wines come directly from the chateau. And almost all the wines we had the night before from Chateau Yquem and the Cheval Blancs came from the chateau. So that provenance is impeccable. We had a bit of a problem with corky wines. Both the 2001 Petit Cheval and the Cheval Blanc had a little TCA taint to them. This is one of the things that I do at this seminar. I make sure that all the wines are already canted and ready for service, and that you get a good example of that wine. And I don't need 25 tasters looking at me, because that's approximately how many people we get out of one bottle. They didn't get a fair share because their bottle of 1990 wasn't as good as the other ones. And we had only 2 bottles that were substandard in the normal lineup. I'm calling the normal lineup because the 52s were purchased from another wine merchant, and they were not good examples of that vintage. So, okay, well, on to the first flight. The first flight we had was the Petit Cheval, which is the second wine of Cheval Blanc, and this wine usually stays up into barrels for about 12 months. The Cheval Blanc is about 18 months. That's one of the differences. It's also the new vines on the property, and the barrels that don't make it into Cheval Blanc. The second wine phenomenon is something that's happened relatively recently in Bordeaux, and now most of the Sauternes properties also are doing this, and they create a second wine to make the quality of the first wine even better. And I remember the first time I tasted wine at Chateau Cheval Blanc and met Pierre Lurton, the first wine they gave me, I thought was the Cheval Blanc. It was the Petit Cheval. This wine is so good. In vintages like 2005, it rivals any first wine made in Bordeaux. The 2005 was most excellent. This lovely kind of barnyardy classic earth that you get, tobacco spice, a little bit of that rosemary that you get from Cheval Blanc, and a mintiness, a nice toasty oak, lovely red currant berry fruit. Just delicious, almost as interesting and complex as the first wine. That was definitely the wine of the flight for the Petit Cheval for me. The 2004, very classic like the vintage. 2003 had this kind of lovely confectioner's note to it, which was interesting, maybe not quite as classic as the other wines. And then the 01, as we mentioned, we had one bottle that was slightly corky. The other bottle, very classic, very nice, an elegant and refined style Petit Cheval. Cheval Blanc, the big boy, the white horse, was up next, and we had a lovely a lineup of Cheval Blanc, starting with the 2006, the newest release. Well, actually, the 2007 is out now. The 2006 was nice, very very fruity and very much in its first primary evolutionary stage of its life, but it did show the balance and the finesse that is Cheval Blanc. The 2005, wow, what a blockbuster this wine is. If you can get your hands on some of this stuff, I highly recommend it. Unfortunately, it sells for upwards of $800 or $1,000 a bottle now. Huge potential for the future with this wine. 2004, more herbaceousness on the nose, a little more of a classic style vintage in Bordeaux, but still very elegant and refined. 2003 maybe had a little bit of VA, volatile acidity on the nose. This was a very hot year, a very ripe style wine, but still this fig and this vanilla tobacco spice coming through on the finish, really exotic and really nice. 2001, as I mentioned before, was a classic vintage, and this wine was showing some restraint and some elegance and some finesse. 2000, wow, what a blockbuster. 2000, Cheval Blanc, one of the wines of the tasting for me. 98, not far behind it, another classic vintage, and one you can usually find at a much more reasonable price than 2000. I don't know where we got this 98, but it is a little expensive. And then 96 had this lovely toasty caramel note on the nose, a little more lighter in style, but still very nice, very elegant. 1990, a blockbuster, one of the wines of the tasting also for me. Killer, had this lovely coffee and caramel and leathery kind of gamey note. Really outstanding. 89, very drinkable. 89 was a very fruit-forward vintage in Bordeaux. Most excellent. 1982, killer, blockbuster year. The Cheval Blanc just showing really nice, starting to show some signs of maturity, but still had a ways to go. 71, not a great vintage, I didn't think, in Bordeaux, but this wine was showing very nice. And then the two old dogs, the 64, the fill was down to about here on both bottles of 64, but the wine was surprisingly good. Still had this lovely chocolate and spice note on the finish. And then the 52s were all shipper bottles, and they were not great examples of that wine. They all smelled different. I would question whether they doctored up these wines with a little something, and the source that they came from maybe not as great as from the Chateau Direct. That was the Chateau Cheval Blanc seminar. I'm your host, Andrew Lampisoni, signing off for today for the Wine Watch, saying remember, always drink the good stuff first.